Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming today. I first met Nolan through his work with SC Audubon as the Coastal Program Coordinator, where he is an advocate for preserving our, works tirelessly to preserve our shorebird populations along the coast, work he continued throughout his coursework and master's thesis research. His experiences in this position led him to the realization that more traditional eco-education approaches were usually not sufficient to actually change behaviors. And he came to the MES program wanting to learn more about marketing-based approaches, which he'll tell you about in a moment. And I want to say that throughout, Nolan's work has been truly independent and fully interdisciplinary, bringing together diverse approaches to solve conservation and management problems. And although his thesis research was cut short by the pandemic, he nonetheless was able to pilot some really novel outreach programs, which he will tell you about in a few minutes. I don't want to take up much of his time, so I'll stop there. His committee, I'll quickly introduce. We have Whitehead, William Veal, and Robert Priouleau. And I want to thank all of them for all of their support for Nolan through this whole process. Nolan, take it away.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for being here. It's cool to see so many friendly and familiar faces and names. Share my screen, start the PowerPoint, and we'll get started. So my name is Nolan Schillerstrom. I'm happy to present my thesis for everybody today. The title of my research is Social Marketing as a Tool to Reduce Human Disturbance to Federally Threatened Rufa Red Knot. The Latin name is Calidris canutus rufa. All the photos in this presentation are mine unless otherwise noted. And I also wanted to be sure to thank the graduate school and the MES program for 2 years of a research assistantship that made it possible for me to do this research and to go back to school to obtain this graduate degree. Without further ado, so I'll be going through my presentation in about this order. I'll ease you into an introduction through context of this issue that shorebirds face, go into red knot specifically, and then talk about some of the existing and new strategies for protecting beach birds. We'll go through the methods, the results, and then my favorite part is closer to the end, where I will show some of the creative products that came about as part of the resulting marketing campaign. Then we'll go through conclusions and future research. So the whole reason for this project really is based in the fact that coastal birds are in a lot of trouble. We've seen about a 70% decline in North American shorebirds over the last 40 to 50 years. These massive population declines are caused in large part by human disturbance, and that is very well documented. And current conservation strategies for beach birds have proven effective, but limited resources and ever-increasing beach visitation by people calls for more effective, larger scale solutions and effective solutions, right? So even if the habitat exists among coastal development pressures and rising seas, shorebirds are usually forced to abandon a site because there are too many people and dogs that also love to use the beach. The negative effects of human disturbance and the rapid decline in shorebird populations are well documented. So this study in particular focused on the red knot, which is a long-distance migrant. It's one of the longest distance migratory animals in the entire world. This map to the left, I drew the little red arrows on it, so it's not exactly scientific, but this kind of gives you a general idea about the migratory path that some of these red knot take. Many will spend their winters in the very southern tip of South America, in Tierra del Fuego, some in Brazil, and then every spring they'll fly up the Atlantic Flyway, making a few stops along the way on their way to the Arctic, where they will nest. This bird has a nickname you may have heard before. It's called the moon bird because one of the oldest living red knot individuals has lived long enough to fly the same distance as it takes to get to the moon and halfway back. So that round trip migration every year is almost 20,000 miles. South Carolina is a stopover area for these birds. For red knot, stopover areas are broadly defined as places where migrant birds stop to rest, drink, and eat. Stopover sites serve as sort of stepping stones or rungs on a ladder for shorebirds in between wintering and breeding grounds. They need to stop along their epic 10,000-mile one-way migration to rest and refuel. Without access to the energy available from prey at these staging or stopover sites, red knot and other shorebirds would not survive migration. Large portions of the Atlantic population of red knot concentrate at a handful of sites along their route, some sites in the United States, and some individuals use South Carolina as their last refueling stop before flying thousands of miles to the Arctic nesting grounds. So the fact that they use South Carolina as one of their last stops, and that's been discovered in recent years, in like the last 5 years, by folks at South Carolina Department of Natural Resources and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So until recently, Delaware Bay was thought to be the final Atlantic coast stopover for a significant majority of the red knot population, making its way to the Arctic breeding grounds each spring. But I'll call her out by name because she's a dear colleague, but Felicia Sanders used tracking technology like geolocators and nanotags that revealed that some of these individuals fly directly to the Arctic from South Carolina beaches. And so my focal site is one of those sites that hosts anywhere from 3,000 to 8,000 birds, one of the largest single concentrations of red knots in the entire hemisphere. And so red knot are equally in trouble. They were listed as federally threatened in 2014. So just to give you a little bit of background about their decline, as of 2008, only 20 to 30,000 knots remained in the Western Hemisphere compared to over 100,000 in the late 1980s. So think about that for a second. That's 20 to 30 years where their population was cut down to 20 to 30% of what it used to be. After more drastic drops in populations, even beyond those 2008 numbers, the Rufa red knot was federally listed in December 2014 under the Endangered Species Act. And that listing references loss of breeding and non-breeding habitat, reduced prey availability. These birds rely on horseshoe crab eggs as they migrate, and a suite of other associated threats. Human disturbance was also identified as the most immediate and tangible threat to migrating red knot. So all in all, a balance must be found between human use of the beach and shorebird survival in order to recover these populations. And I fully realize that completely cutting off human access to the beach, while that's effective for bird conservation, is not usually politically or socially feasible. So any viable solution to declining coastal bird populations needs to consider the cultural, economic, and personal value of the beach along with its habitat value to wildlife. So we'll zoom into my study site. I have to use a disguised name for the beach to protect the identity of the survey participants. So while many of you on the call know what the actual beach is called, I will be referring to it as Naughty Beach throughout the presentation, and that's how it's represented in the thesis as well. So Naughty Beach, red knot, Naughty Beach, you get it. It has about 52 acres of designated critical habitat for shorebirds, and that habitat was mostly created by a renourishment project in 2015, where they actually relocated this inlet to create this habitat. And so it's a private barrier island. You have to have a pass to get on, or be a homeowner, or be a visitor that's renting or something. And it's attached to the mainland by a drivable bridge, so I could drive there. This section of the beach is legally off limits to dogs. And most of the human population on the island is middle to upper class with a median household income of over $100,000. Their median property values are also pretty high up there, over $600,000. It's a pretty small population of people in the scheme of things. There's approximately 1,694 people that live here, including full-time residents, part-time residents, as well as short-term vacation renters. And so there was a lot being done on Naughty Beach to protect red knot in 2019, which is when my study started. And there's a lot more being done now in 2021. So this image that we'll also see a little later on is to give you a better idea of all of the signage out there, which is one major way that birds are protected. There's regulatory and informational signage on the way to the beach as well as out on the beach. And I'll dive into this a little bit more later. But just want to share a few quotes here before we get into the nitty-gritty details. So Wright et al. In a paper in 2015 said, without the ability to influence human behavior, a conservationist's role will likely be limited to that of describing the loss of biodiversity and decline of the environment. And this is precisely why this emerging field of conservation marketing needs to be pursued further and perfected for use in wildlife conservation. And then another quote, and oh, hey, look, this one's by me. Something that I wrote in my thesis that has kind of guided this project is that ultimately human disturbance comes down to a choice that every beachgoer makes as they approach a flock of birds. My goal, as I set out to do this research, was to better understand that choice. Now there's been a lot of work done in the literature about behavior change frameworks. One of the most commonly used frameworks dating from the 1970s shows this very simple linear progression from environmental knowledge to environmental attitude to pro-environmental behavior. This suggests that by increasing knowledge, you then increase attitudes, which ultimately leads to environmental friendly behaviors. Research since then has shown that there is a discrepancy between attitude and behavior, yet this overly simplified representation is still predominantly used by wildlife conservation practitioners. Education and raising awareness, we know now really isn't enough to change behaviors. Newer models propose that there is no direct relationship between environmental knowledge and pro-environmental behavior, but that behavior is instead shaped by many conflicting and competing factors. Choosing not to chase birds like red knot and other migratory shorebirds is no exception. This is supported by many more complex and accurate behavior change frameworks, which have led to the development of the most recent model of pro-environmental behavior that I was able to find. And as you can see in this updated model, knowledge, attitudes, and a plethora of other variables all interact in various ways to get to that end goal of pro-environmental behavior. So I'm going to bring this back to conservation behavior change. And so a few surveys have been conducted in Australia and the US to gauge levels of beachgoer education about shorebird conservation issues, attitudes about shorebird conservation, and if beachgoers would act to reverse population declines. Some promising results showed that 90% of people surveyed agreed that shorebirds and people can coexist. However, only 69% of those people surveyed would take action to protect shorebirds. In two other studies, beachgoers were asked about their receptiveness to management on a beach they frequented. Results showed that the not in my backyard NIMBY mindset was in full effect. People that were more familiar with the beach had greater awareness of shorebird species, but reported greater inconvenience associated with management. This is consistent with that model I showed on the last slide, in that knowledge and attitudes, while still part of the overall behavior change framework, it cannot change behaviors on their own. So this study, my research measured beachgoer attitudes, values, and their knowledge/awareness levels in order to gain insight about those barriers that prevent beachgoers from walking around flocks of shorebirds instead of walking through them. This information was then used to create a social marketing strategy to address those barriers that exist for beachgoers to exhibit the preferred shorebird-friendly behavior. I'm going to kind of skip through this, but there are a lot of really great strategies already employed to protect birds on the beach from education, ecotourism, signage, and enforcement. They all address different parts of that behavior change framework, but none of them go all the way to addressing behavior change when it comes to migratory birds. So enter social marketing, which I'll define for everybody, that it's the use of traditional marketing techniques to impact social issues. Education and signage have yet to show that they're completely effective at changing behaviors for migratory bird conservation, and enforcement is too resource intensive to be realistic in most cases. So social marketing, I think, is another great tool that we can add to the toolbox of all these great tools that we already use. So research into more specifically community-based social marketing shows its promise as a tool for creating social change. So this is a research-based approach based on the social sciences that demonstrates that behavior change is most effectively achieved through community-level initiatives that focus on removing barriers to an activity while simultaneously enhancing the activity's benefits. And it actually has a, so it was coined by Doug Mackenzie Moore. He wrote 2 really digestible, easy to digest books that I read as part of this work. And they outline some pretty strict steps that you should follow to create a community-based social marketing campaign. And those steps are outlined here on this slide. So my research objectives building off of that CBSM framework were to evaluate how do the existing red knot protection strategies impact beachgoer awareness, attitudes, and behavior near resting flocks, which existing protections seem to be most effective at impacting behavior change, and then how does all of that collected data provide insight for a social marketing campaign. And then I just wanted to double check myself, does this data challenge that supposedly outdated linear theory of behavior change? I aim to evaluate the current state of shorebird conservation efforts on Naughty Beach and implement that, that social marketing campaign. So I used 2 survey instruments to collect all my data, which I'll elaborate on in a few slides, but I'll describe a typical survey. I would arrive to Naughty Beach and walk about 10 minutes to this critical area study site that was off limits to dogs. I would usually stand right about here. This picture that's up on the screen is a Google picture from 2019. So the beach has changed a whole lot since then, but I'd usually stand about there, and this is kind of what my view would look like. I kind of had a good view of everything that was going on. Data were collected in the spring and fall at all times of the day, with the majority of surveys occurring between 8:30 a.m. and noon at all tides. These periods corresponded to the peak red knot migration season, when thousands of red knot stop over on Naughty Beach. So let's see, some other relevant details about what it looked like when I went out to do the survey. Environmental variables were collected immediately when I got to the beach, like wind speed, temperature, tide, what stage of the tide cycle it was. I would record if there was an in-person steward educator on the beach, and then I'd also record the total number of people, dogs, on leash and off leash, as well as horses on the beach. And those horses were usually accompanied by a gas-powered all-terrain vehicle. So the first thing that I would do after collecting that environmental data is try and find a flock of birds. And lucky, I would come across a flock of red knot. There are other species mixed in here. I'd find the birds, and then I'd wait for people to come near the flock. This was kind of difficult to do, to just sit and watch people disturb the birds sometimes, because normally I'd get out there and try and keep them away from the birds, right? So data were collected on human beachgoer groups of any size, as long as they came within a certain distance, about 30 yards of a flock of beach birds, and therefore had a chance to interact with those birds. Beachgoers that did not have an opportunity to interact with the flock were not included in the study. Every participant's behavior while near the birds was observed and recorded using the observational checklist, and then participants were stopped to be asked a series of survey questions. Everything was observed from a distance through a spotting scope to ensure that my presence both did not influence any of the people's behaviors, but also so that I did not disturb the birds. like I said, data were collected on any beachgoer that walked near a flock of red knot on Naughty Beach. So I'd be about here. People would walk down the beach, have a choice to either walk through the birds or walk around the birds. And then I would catch them on their way back to ask them those survey questions. So I used a pretty simple list of possible behaviors when recording the behaviors of beachgoers. It was either they stopped, they turned around, they walked around the birds, or the birds flushed. The only two exclusive behavioral observations were walked around and birds flushed. So for instance, if a subject could flush the birds, stop, and turn around all in the same observation, but they could not be recorded as walked around and then flushed the birds, because the participant flushed the birds, they no longer qualified as having walked around, right? Also recorded how many people were in the group and kind of what age group they looked like they were in. And then I counted the flock size and then counted how many different species were in each group. So then they had to walk past me to head back to the beach access point. So then I would stop them and go into this survey. Each survey started with sort of a consent statement, me asking if they would be willing to participate in a short survey. If they agreed, I would just ask them this series of 20 questions and write down their answers. In some cases, I had to kind of walk or even jog alongside survey participants as they continued their walk. There were 20 total questions in the survey with opportunities for participants to elaborate on their answers. When they elaborated on their responses, I wrote down key phrases and sentences to help inform the campaign message development and identify emergent themes. All these questions were crafted to collect information on demographic attributes and to determine their levels of awareness and attitudes toward red knot, other beach birds, and the current recreational restrictions intended to protect shorebirds. Oh yeah, so this picture is kind of fun. It was taken by Ed Conrad, who is a friend and colleague that lives out on Naughty Beach. He grabbed this picture of me interviewing a couple in 2019, and it's cool because there's this piping plover flying by in the background right behind us. Piping plover is another endangered species, but just kind of cool. That's what it looked like, just to have it out there on the beach talking to people. So I'm going to skip through these more focused slides. This is all detailed in the write-up, but every question was related to one of the research objectives. Like I said, I apologize. I'm going to skip through these. Forgot about the animation on that. So after all the surveys were done and when I started creating the campaign, I decided that I needed a little bit more information. And so I conducted some additional interviews, which lasted about 30 minutes with individual realtors on the island who were also longtime residents. So the two people that I interviewed were, I think one had been there for 7 or 8 years and one had been there for 12 years. So they knew a lot about kind of the culture of the island. These additional interviews were meant to help inform that communications campaign. And then these questions were crafted in collaboration with a marketing firm based in South Carolina called Blue Ion Outpost, which volunteered their expertise to the study. These questions are based on the interviews that Blue Ion Outpost conducts with new clients. So these were all the open-ended questions that I asked. Then when it came to data analysis, I organized the data in Excel and used R to analyze it. Chi-squared or Fisher's exact test for count data were used to identify significant associations between categorical variables, and then Fisher's tests were used for any variables which had expected values below 5. Normally that'd be a chi-square test, but my sample size was so low that I had to use Fisher's tests with a lot of these. So these students' t-tests and an Anova test were used to test for significance between two variables when at least one of the variables was quantitative. Qualitative survey responses were analyzed to look for emergent themes among key phrases and sentences to create a code book. Those resulting emergent themes were then used to summarize responses for the entire group and to test for correlations between those themes and behavioral observations or demographic attributes. I also ended up creating a few aggregate variables for the analysis to represent the overall awareness and attitudes of each survey participant. So total awareness score is the sum of positive responses to all of the awareness questions. And then that score was broken down into bird awareness score and general awareness score. I think the total score for the total was 12. And then there were 6 questions that told me how aware people were of the birds, and then 6 questions about their general awareness while at the beach. There was also an attitude score for same thing. It's a collection of, it's the sum of the responses to questions that had to do with gauging their attitude towards beach birds, and then the same thing for specifically dog owners. And then I also created a aggregate variable called noticed flock, and this one I thought was kind of tricky or funny, I guess, because it represents when a survey participant responded saying that they had seen beach birds in the last 30 minutes. And then I asked them to point out basically, where did you see those? And then if they correctly pointed out the flock of birds that I saw them interacting with earlier, then they noticed the flock. A lot of responses were like, oh yeah, I saw some wading birds up in the dunes. And it's like, no, you did not interact with those birds. Or I saw an osprey, even though they walked through a flock of birds on the beach. So the next set of slides will show my results. There's a lot more in the written thesis, but I'll show a few response summaries for the demographic questions and some of the statistically significant results before diving into our creative campaign. So a total of 35 participants were included in the final analysis. The basic demographic breakdown of those participants is presented in this slide. Most participants were older and female, though there was representation across all sex and age groups. The majority of participants were part of a beachgoer group containing both male and female individuals. And if the participant was by themselves, they were usually female, which I thought was interesting. Most participants appeared to be between 50 to 65 years of age, with the second largest group appearing to be over 65 years old. All 35 participant groups were walkers. The average number of people in each group was just under 2, and group sizes ranged from 1 to 4. 2 participant groups had a leash dog with them in the protected area, and 2 other groups had a dog off leash in the protected area. 3 runners and 1 biker were also observed, but I may have been a little out of shape at the time because I could not get their attention quick enough to administer the survey as they were running or biking by. So they were removed from the analysis. The average red knot flock size was 132 birds, but the size ranged anywhere from 0 to 1,500 birds at a time while I was surveying. With mixed flocks included, this just includes any other shorebird species. The average was increased to 199 birds, ranging from 1 to 1,800. A little bit more background on just summarizing the participants. Most of them were infrequent visitors to the beach, only visiting a couple times a month or less. You can see that in the graph to the left, and were either vacationing or part-time residents, with the lowest category being full-time residents. Also interesting, and I'll bring this up again later, but the number of people and dogs, leashed and unleashed, which was counted through the whole thing, observed in the protected area was greatly reduced during 2020 compared to 2019. Even when correcting for total survey effort, there were noticeably fewer people and dogs in the protected area in 2020 versus those observed the year before in 2019. Fewer red knot were also observed in 2020 because peak migration occurred during the start of the pandemic and surveys could not be completed through that year. So this is a summary of the behaviors observed. So the red bars are those bad behaviors that we don't want to see, and that green bar is what we do want to see, that people walked around the flock, and then the blue bar is just they didn't flush the birds. There were a few instances in which the participant did not walk around the flock, but the birds also did not flush. So that's why you see a little bit of a discrepancy. You'd think that these would be mirror images of each other, but that's the reason why. After looking at all of the behavioral options, I chose to focus on these two, birds flushed and walked around observations, because they were the most reliable for determining each participant's impact on beach birds. More than half of participants flushed the birds and chose not to walk around the flock. And very few people stopped or turned around in response to a flock of beach birds. Some interesting results that I wanted to highlight also as I'm summarizing this data. So the majority of participants reported not knowing that making beach birds fly off is harmful to them. Looking at this top right graph, so 66% said that they didn't know that making them fly off is harmful, and a slightly smaller majority had not heard of red knot, and that's this top left one. And then out of the 12 participants who knew that making beach birds fly off is harmful to them, so I'm taking this 34% of people, and that's what's in this graph in the bottom. I asked them, where did you hear that making beach birds fly off is harmful to them? And the majority of responses, 75% of those people, said that they just knew it from common sense. So every participant who said that it was common sense to leave beach birds alone were observed walking around the flock instead of through. So this, I think, is a really interesting thing that could be elaborated on. I'll talk about that in future research. So to continue summarizing these survey responses, here are some snippets from the open-ended question responses. When I asked, why did you avoid flushing beach birds, to those people that actually walked around the birds, some of the cool responses I got was, it's their home. It's their place. So kind of giving ownership to the birds, that bird first language. And they seemed happy, so I didn't want to disturb them. On the flip side, when asked, why do you or others flush birds, I found that most often, even if somebody was observed flushing the birds, they weren't keen to admit it. A few were, but so why did you flush through the birds? I got pretty pictures. It looks cool. It was the easier route across the beach, whether it was for distance or because the sand was hot or harder to walk on. They were in my way. It's fun for the birds. They'll just fly somewhere else. And then somebody equated goal of stealing food to any beach bird. So they kind of had a disdain for birds in general, I think. So now I'll move into some of the results from the statistical tests that I ran on the data. So this graph, it shows two variables at once here. It splits participants up. The ones that walked around the birds are over here. The ones that did not walk around are over here. And then it's also comparing responses to question 19 of the survey. Did you know that flushing beach birds is harmful? So walking around the flock was associated with participants who knew that making beach birds fly off is harmful, and participants who said it was common sense to leave birds alone. Participants who said they knew that making beach birds fly off is harmful to them were significantly more likely to be observed walking around the flock, with a p-value of 0.007. I tested every variable question responses and observed behaviors against the aggregate variables that I created, and found a few interesting results also. So this compares bird awareness with age group and then total awareness with age group. So participant age, and we'll see in the next couple slides, beach visitation frequency and residence status were all found to have a significant effect on participants' level of awareness on the beach. So what we see here on this slide is that older participants from 36 to 65 were significantly more likely to have higher awareness of beach birds. And older participants from 36 to 65 plus were significantly more observant of their surroundings while at the beach. This gets into beach visitation frequently. So participants who visited the beach more often, between 1 time a week to daily, were significantly more likely to have higher total awareness scores. This means that these groups were more aware of their surroundings and more aware of the birds. The highest mean total awareness score is held by the one participant who responded that they came to the beach 4 to 5 times a week. So we're seeing some interesting trends here. And then finally, resident status. So full-time residents were shown to have significantly higher total awareness scores versus part-time or vacationing residents. And part-time residents had higher scores than vacationing participants. So this kind of goes along the lines of what is kind of generally understood out on Naughty Beach, that the vacationers are more often part of the problem, and that the full-time residents who are more familiar with the beach are a lot more aware of the birds and in general about the beach. So bird awareness scores also followed that same significant trend, with full-time scoring the highest, part-time the next, and then vacationing people were the lowest. So finally, noticed birds, that aggregate variable that I created, telling me that the participant actually noticed the flock that they were interacting with. This noticed birds variable was also significantly associated with higher bird awareness, which makes sense. This aggregate variable served as a way to verify participant responses to that have you noticed any birds on the beach, right? So it measured the true nature of the participants' ability to recognize beach birds, which are notoriously good at blending in with their surroundings. So we'll now get into how the data helped answer my research objective questions. So again, this is kind of the beach sign layout. There were 2 types of signage on the beach. So I'd split it up into signs that were seen on the way to the beach, which were these rule signs and some of these interpretive signs with turtles, dolphins, and birds on them. And then on the beach, if they came down to this critical area, they would first pass a line of signs and buoys that were that designated the no dog area. And then there were some signs put at the high tide line designating the nesting area, and an area that is off limits to people. So these were the signs that were seen on the beach. These were the signs on the way to the beach, and they were both interpretive as well as regulatory signs. So out of all 4 different types of signage, the white no dog signs were noticed more often by all participants, but noticing signage had little to no bearing on the likelihood that someone would walk around the flock. To say that in another way, because that was one of the major findings, the analyses in this study suggest that beach signage had no bearing on beachgoer awareness, attitudes, or behaviors with regard to walking around the flock. In order for signage to affect beachgoer behaviors in a way that benefits shorebirds, they must first notice the signs. And we can see here with this white bar, for both people that walked around and people that did not walk around the birds, those white dog zone signs were reportedly the most noticed type of signage, with 80% of participants noticing those signs on the beach. That high percentage is likely due to the abundance and placement of those white no dog signs, as well as the simple and obvious message that they conveyed. Compared to the other types of signage, dog zone signs were noticeably simpler and more straightforward with fewer words. These results show that the current use and design of signage for migratory shorebirds at Naughty Beach might need to be reevaluated, and the same is likely true at other beaches in South Carolina. So even with clear and abundant dog zone signage in 2019, 2 participants had a leash dog with them in the protected area and 2 had off-leash dogs with them in the protected area. However, a really cool change happened between the 2 years. So right after I finished collecting data, about a month afterwards, a new dog leash ordinance went into effect on the beach. So 1 month after those pre-campaign surveys were finished, they expanded the designated no dog zone critical area about a quarter mile. Once that area was expanded, 0 dogs were witnessed in the critical area the next year in 2020. COVID-19 likely impacted these results in a major way by causing an overall decline in beach use, and survey effort was lower that year because of the pandemic. So these results are preliminary at best, but the data can still be somewhat compared across years by looking at the number of people and dogs divided by survey effort. And so that's what I'm showing here. Between 2019 and 2020, that ordinance change, based on this data, is associated with a lot less people coming to the beach, as well as a complete drop off in dogs being there when they weren't supposed to. So kind of cool. Oops. Cat must be stuck if you hear her meowing in the background. So the next couple slides are going to dive into some of the other existing strategies on the beach. This is another friend and colleague, Mark Andrews, pictured here to the left, a picture taken by Ed Conrad, who we know from earlier. So stewardship, this is what stewardship is on the beach. This pic was taken before the pandemic, obviously. And then digital articles are also a major way that that local bird advocates are advocating for birds and spreading this message that we need to keep our distance from them. So the effectiveness of stewardship on Naughty Beach can only be commented on with reference to 3 participants who claim to have been educated by a steward that year, only one of which was observed walking around the birds. The one well-behaved participant had a 10 out of 12 total awareness score compared to other participants. Unfortunately, the other 2 who claimed to have been educated by a steward were observed flushing birds. These 2 also had lower awareness scores with a 7 and a 9 out of 12 than the other steward educated participant. So 3 participants are not enough to make any conclusions about the rest of Naughty Beach's beachgoer population in relation to stewardship. But recent research provides much more comprehensive evidence that long-term multi-year in-person stewardship is essential to helping coastal birds thrive. I should also note that the Naughty Beach stewarding program was in its infancy in 2019, and a much more robust and we think much more effective program is active this year. Now for the digital articles and local news sources, they were not widely recalled by participants as a method for learning about beach birds. Only one participant named the island's newsletter as how they learned that flushing beach birds is harmful to them. And one other participant noted that they learned this from the local bird club, which authors these digital articles. Most participants who claim to know that making beach birds fly off is harmful to them, like I said earlier, reference common sense as to how they knew that. Although these articles didn't seem to have a large effect on beachgoer awareness among surveyed participants, these results do not preclude digital articles from having a positive influence on beachgoers, even if they could not reference it as the source of their knowledge. So data from this study also challenge it. This is my gut check. Am I right in thinking that the old awareness increases attitudes, increases behavior is false, that linear theory of behavior change? So data from this study does indeed challenge that old linear theory of behavior change by showing that high awareness scores were not associated with higher attitude scores, and higher awareness scores or attitude scores were not associated with increased pro-environmental behavior. For example, according to the theory of behavior change, there should be a positive relationship all across the board here between attitude and bird awareness scores. So in other words, as awareness levels increase, so too should bird-friendly attitudes. Instead, what we're seeing on the screen here is that the data show no apparent trend between the 2 variables. Similarly, if the linear theory of behavior change were accurate, there should be a positive relationship between bird awareness and observed behavior. And while we do see those means, it looks like there could be a trend. The Anova test that I ran showed that these were non-significant. So now finally onto the really fun stuff, the social marketing campaign, which I'll get into the creative stuff in a few slides. Red Not Ready and the associated website and social media pages were created using data on people who flushed the birds. Red Not Ready was meant to be a pilot project to be used on other beaches if it's successful. So messages were chosen that could be replicated and scaled to other areas. After a few more graphs, I'll show you the creative sides of this campaign creation. And I am going to kind of skip through these because I know I'm running out of time, but looking at the left graph at first glance, it may appear that the less often someone visited the beach, the more likely they were to flush the birds, but that's actually not true. The number of bird flushing participants that reported visiting the beach once or more, once a week or more, is seven participants here, and that is the same as those who visited on the left side of this graph, 1 to 2 times a year, being 7 people. And then the right graph, similarly, at first glance, vacationers appear to be the primary offenders for making beach birds flush. However, vacationers were also the largest participant group that I surveyed. There were almost as many full and part-time residents observed flushing birds, 9, as there were vacationers flushing birds, which was 10 people or 10 participants. I also looked at beach phone users and dog owners. They were also identified as possible targets. I'm going to skip through this just for the sake of time. I chose Facebook and Instagram for the main channels of communicating with the target audience. The local stories or ads on TV and local publications would have probably been more ideal, but because of budget constraints and the COVID-19 pandemic kind of controlling the news cycle in 2020, Instagram and Facebook were the obvious choices. People in that older age range use Facebook more than any other social media platform, and Instagram and Facebook are owned by the same company, so it's really easy to post to both. So this is what a sample post looks like. Campaign messaging was largely based on those one-on-one interviews with realtors who were also residents on the island. They had a unique perspective of the island and were really able to help a lot here. So messaging was built around social diffusion theory by encouraging both part-time residents and vacationers to the island to want to fit in with their full-time neighbors, even if they're temporary neighbors and fellow community members. Social diffusion occurs when a behavior is thought to be the norm within a social group, and the idea is that a behavior will be adopted by other members of a social group simply because it is the norm. The hashtag #FlockWalk was used for this campaign also. So you can see here this says, Seabrook is a perfect place to go for a beach cruise. We were thankful that the owners of these 2 bikes kept their distance from our flock. They did the hashtag #FlockWalk. Then these posts, you can read them on your own. But residents on Seabrook know how to do the flock walk. Seabrook is red not ready. And beach walkers on Seabrook know that beach birds need their space. The face of the campaign on Facebook and Instagram was Mama Red Knot, which started as a concept in the top left and was brought to life by Roger Schillerstrom, who's my dad. He's an award-winning cartoonist who volunteered his talents to the campaign. Mama Red Knot was based on research showing that attaching terms of kinship like brother, mother, sister to wildlife species names may promote a willingness to contribute to conservation-related causes. And that research was actually done by a faculty member at the College of Charleston, Kirko. This also allowed for a creative and relatable perspective to convey the core message, walk around the flock. The basic content for the website and social media pages consisted of 2 types of messages, these short educational ones and eye-catching photography. The website was viewed 634 times in 2020 with 235 total unique visitors. Most of those visitors were arrived to the website from areas either on or near Naughty Beach. So themes of pride, sense of place, and freedom were used to coin red knot as the unique and rare bird that it is. Vivid imagery modeled the proper behavior of walking around the flock and intentionally avoided using images of people exhibiting the wrong behavior of walking through a flock of beach birds. Red knot were placed in a human context by anthropomorphizing the birds to make them relatable. Naughty Beach beachgoers value the solitude of their community, the same solitude that red knot require. Red knot come to Naughty Beach looking for a peaceful, resource-rich beach, which is hard to find with such widespread development and human recreation. Those are also the same reasons that a lot of people come to Naughty Beach. These types of posts promoted the preferred behavior as something residents chose to do because it is part of their identity. The intention was to get others to recognize the behavior by asking neighbors to model it on social media, share your flock walk. This strategy also targeted part-time and short-term vacationers by making them want to be part of the community. Almost about to wrap up here, but a common sentiment shared by residents on Naughty Beach is that tourists were the only problem and locals were not a threat to wildlife as much or at all. But my survey data tell a little bit different story because some full-time residents still flushed birds and had lower awareness. Because of this, the campaign targeted all three of those groups, but also included, it targeted vacationers and part-time residents, but also included verbiage that would appeal to full-time residents too. All this stuff can still be found on Facebook and Instagram. So go and follow Mama Red Knot. Type in redknotready.com into your browser. The website is still active, and I'm eager to do more with it. One more slide of sample posts from the campaign before I wrap this up. I'm hoping that this campaign can serve as a primer for anyone else trying to do something similar. There's a lot of room for further testing, and this was actually very heavily built off of work that's been going on almost simultaneously throughout the coast, led by the Virginia Tech Shorebird program. So finally wrapping this up, apologize for the long presentation. There was a lot of information to share, but red knot desperately need conservation strategies that work. And based on their continued decline, there's a lot of work left to do in order to recover their populations. On stopover habitat like Knotty Beach, the primary goal is to reduce human disturbance so they can rest and refuel before continuing on the rest of their journey to the Arctic. Existing strategies and this new community-based social marketing campaign framework should work cooperatively to help reduce the threat of human disturbance. Since 2019, dog leash laws have changed for the better, and a full volunteer-led shorebird stewardship program has been implemented as of 2021. But in 2019, I did see that signage and education on Knotty Beach in 2019 were not effective at influencing beachgoer awareness, bird-friendly attitudes, or behaviors. Older age and an innate common sense knowledge of the effects of human disturbance were more associated with higher awareness, bird-friendly attitudes, and bird-friendly behaviors than any other variable. So that intimate familiarity with the beach seems to have more bearing on somebody's likelihood of noticing and walking around a flock than does any conservation strategy that was analyzed as part of this study. The strategies discussed in this thesis remove several barriers to pro-environmental behavior as defined by Colmus and Agyeman, which is where that framework came from. And when operating in tandem, have the potential to substantially influence beachgoer behaviors. But on their own, there's not enough evidence to suggest that they will significantly reduce disturbance across shorebird resting sites. And again, we're talking specifically about those migratory roosting shorebirds. To achieve widespread success in decreasing disturbances, I really think organizations must think more creatively. Click through these here. So the CBSM campaign, the Red Knot Ready campaign, developed and implemented as part of this research, has the potential to both add to that toolbox of strategies and amplify other existing strategies for red knot and other shorebird species conservation on Knotty Beach and beyond. This study focused on red knot, but I think there are widespread applications to a lot of other species as well that follow a similar life strategy. People are generally unwilling to change their behavior, even when presented with an overwhelming amount of data that suggests that they should. This is true of other behaviors that would benefit people and wildlife, like keeping cats indoors, which would greatly reduce wild bird deaths, transitioning away from fossil fuels or eating less meat, which would help with the negative impacts of climate change. Similarly, many conservation scientists, land managers, and other practitioners continue to rely solely on education in an effort to encourage pro-environmental behaviors. But we know that just by increasing awareness, you're not going to end up changing behaviors. So this research challenges some of those long-held beliefs about the best methods to protect beach birds. It also reinforces the need for additional protections. So practitioners need to be efficient, precise, and coordinated, especially with such limited funding for shorebird conservation. There are a lot of amazing experts in the state already right now that are doing amazing work, really effective work. And so I hope that this research just helps inform that work going forward. I hope that multi-method research is pursued and expanded in order to reduce those negative effects of human disturbance. Whatever the methodology, goals of future research should focus on practical information that can be used by beach managers and to develop research goals alongside those practitioners. Wherever possible, further studies should take a multi-method approach to include both social and biological methods because the issue of human disturbance to shorebirds is extremely complex and cannot be solved by one discipline alone. So some areas of future research that I think would be interesting to pursue include why do older people have higher awareness and attitude scores. It'd be great to test particular verbiage on beach signs as well as virtual communications using focus groups and then tie that back to actual behavioral observations. Really interested to look more into some of these specific strategies, particularly to optimize signage, looking at sign size, proximity to birds, font size, color, content, and other variables specifically related to signage. I think that'd be a practical follow-up to help maximize those signposting efforts. And then lastly, the actual sources of common sense knowledge that many survey participants referenced is kind of a mystery to me a little bit. So although perceived as pure intuition, common sense must come from somewhere. So just kind of diving into that, I think would be an interesting area of future research. So a couple thank yous to everybody on Naughty Beach that helped throughout this study, inform, help get me passes onto the island. My colleagues at Audubon, South Carolina, DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, Virginia Tech Shorebird Program. My entire committee helped immensely. And then Dr. Annette Watson and Lucy Davis. And then saving the best for last, my brilliant wife, Whitney Seabrook. We got married on the 24th of April this year. It's been a crazy, crazy couple of months. And so many others that I would like to thank. But that is all that I have. And I'd be happy to take questions.
Let's start with a Zoom round of applause. Great job, Nolan.
Great job.
So normally, if you have any questions from the public, it's absolutely okay to just speak up and ask them. Or you can, if you have your video on, you can raise your hand because we can see you. Andrew.
Hey, thanks. Great presentation, really interesting. I appreciate your follow through too, all the way to the media campaign and everything. My question is, do you have a feel for people who didn't willingly participate in the survey? I mean, did you notice any differences in behavior from those people, and kind of generally what proportion of people passing by were willing participants?
Yeah, that's a good question. So everybody that I stopped to survey were willing to participate in the survey. Maybe if I had done a lot more surveys and was out there every day and gotten like 1,000 participants, then maybe it would have been different. But overall, all the people that I stopped were willing to participate. I think that, I don't know if this helps answer your question or not, but some of the folks, it was just like 3 people that were kind of agitated as they answered questions, or like they were like, I'm not stopping for the birds, you know, just kind of that sort of attitude. They still were willing to stop and answer questions, but they definitely were the ones that would walk through the birds without a care. I hope that helps answer your question. Everybody was willing to respond to the survey questions though.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Good job.
I have a question. So I found it really interesting. First, great job, by the way. And it's a very applied project. And I think it's really interesting, mainly with the marketing strategy for me. So I just found it very interesting that you said a lot of the signs weren't as useful. And I wondered, because you did mention it was mostly tourists, I wondered if there were like hotels or something that could be specifically targeted, or if there were any studies that you looked at specifically targeting those tourists when they're at their hotel with more of a mindset of that, as opposed before they do something and they feel like they did something wrong, and then they're going to be a little bit more defensive.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did not come across any studies that like tried to target outreach campaigns to like people while they're sitting in their hotel. I can speak from my work with Audubon, South Carolina. We have tried giving handouts to hotels in advance, like trying to do that before the beach education. This is not super scientific, but I found that it's not as effective to give handouts to hotels because it's completely dependent on if those hotel owners and staff are bought into your issue. Yeah. Otherwise, they'll just throw your trifold flyer in with the rest of them. Maybe won't even hand it out to renters. So my gut is thinking that like those online communications that we can control and drive and keep the motivation behind might be better, but that would be really interesting to see if like hitting people before they get to the beach with like when they get to their hotel would make a difference, right?
Right. It reminded me a little bit of the marketing strategies for lights off for sea turtles, and you get sea turtles are a little bit more charismatic, arguably for people coming in though. So I just wondered if, and I know they have that at the hotels, like turn your patio light off at night, that sort of thing. And I didn't know if there was like maybe a comparative study to do people read it there more, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't find anything, but not to say it's not out there. That's interesting.
Yeah. No, it's cool. This is a great study. This is awesome. Thank you.
I'm just going to riff on that for a sec, and we'll open. The committee will have a lot more time to ask questions, but I want to riff off what Lucy said, because I was thinking kind of along similar lines. There's this, you had a large proportion of folks who didn't even notice there were birds, or if they noticed birds, they were like pointing to the wrong birds. Like, oh yeah, I saw gulls, I saw shorebirds. And it made me wonder if shorebirds suffer from not being sea turtles, basically. We don't know what they are. Mm-hmm. And should we be starting at a more basic level of awareness? There are these things called shorebirds. Most of you won't even see them because they blend in with the environment. They are not gulls, they are not osprey. There's this whole other world out there. It made me think that most of the signage and education stuff was starting at a level that was completely inappropriate for the basic audience, for the general audience, for most of the folks walking on the beach. This distinction of shorebird isn't a thing, right? Yeah, there are birds, they're on the shore, but that there's this separate category called shorebird. I mean, they know what a sea turtle is. I don't think most people actually know what a shorebird is. So what do we do with that? Yeah,
I mean, amazing point. And in this study, I said a few times that we need that baseline level of awareness raising, even though awareness doesn't lead to behavior change. And so where's that balance? Like, what level do we need to hit people at before they get to the beach? But one of the overarching themes was that education does not change behaviors. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
So Nolan, I want to follow up on that in terms of education does not alter behavior, because one of your sentences that's in your thesis, as well as you said verbally in your defense here, is similarly, many conservation scientists, land managers, and other practitioners continue to rely solely on education in an effort to encourage pro-environmental behaviors. So it sounds like education in general does not work, but is that environmental education? Is that environmental education for shorebirds? Is that environmental education for being on the beach? What is that in general? And is there a contradiction between what you found and that statement?
Yeah, yeah. So I think talking about even like the turtle campaigns, I think there was some level of education in that campaign, but they also leaned so heavily into the charismatic nature of this like charismatic megafauna. They made it a local issue that locals care. So I think there was some element of that social diffusion in that campaign as well. And so it is true that education alone does not change behaviors, because it has to, I think, be accompanied by some deeper intention around some bigger strategy that is beyond just saying, there are birds out there, you should walk around them, right? Does that get at what you're asking and bringing up?
Yeah, to a degree, because then my follow-up question is, what is the flock walk? I mean, can you use that as a campaign to change the attitude? I mean, I want to see you demonstrate it right now. We'll do a TikTok and we'll upload it. It'll start trending on Twitter, but we need you to get out there and actually do a flock walk, whatever that is, because that's going to bring more awareness. If general education is not there and it doesn't have an effect, I need you to be a flock walker.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it needs to trend.
I take that somewhat literally too. I think we should all probably meet out at the beach and flock walk together. I think of you doing it would hit.
I'm not sure his age demographic target audiences are big TikTokers, but it could be.
Yeah.
But I'm going to push back on this a little bit more, because I think there's something important here that we're getting around, and that's that. Yeah, as you said, education itself doesn't change behavior, but you can't be educated. You can't change your behavior about something that you don't even know exists. And I think that sea turtles have a huge leg up on that. But when you talk about, I mean, you had a participant who was like, gulls steal my food, I'm walking through their flock. I mean, they're clearly not making distinctions that we would think are important. And I'm not sure how, I think that has to be considered as well when you're thinking about changing behavior. Because if you say do a flock walk and demonstrate walking around a flock of shorebirds, but you have audience members who are like, I'm not walking around gulls, they're stealing my food, right? There's a very basic level of not understanding the problem, and you can't change your behavior about something that you don't know exists. And so I feel like there's got to be some role for something. Now, you can't learn something you don't care about. So how do you get people to care that there are these things called shorebirds that are different from gulls? But yeah, how would you go about dealing with this lack of understanding? How would you recommend that managers go about dealing with this very basic level of, I don't even know that there's this thing that needs to be preserved that's different from these things that annoy me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think my first piece of advice for like somebody, a practitioner that may be asking that question, is get to know the audience, because general education isn't gonna probably cut it for an audience that equates annoying goals with red knot, right? And so that's what I was trying to do with those interviews and with the survey questions, was to really get to know the target audience and refine them to as little of an audience as I could. And so that's where those ideas about like instilling pride and like local pride all came in. I think if you looked at like an adjacent beach that was a public beach, you'd have an audience that had a very different set of values that you could then lean into with a campaign. So whatever education that happens, I think that we really need to dive into the target audience, and it's not good enough to say that everybody's our target audience.
Yeah, no, Nolan, great job. And I just wanted to add to that point. I think it's really interesting. Is like, I think you showed that the linear model doesn't work, and that an educational based premise alone can't work, and that we have awareness issues because maybe the shorebirds aren't as charismatic as the turtles. So those are two elements. There is an element of education that's important, but it can't do it all. We know awareness is a piece of the puzzle. And then this last thing seems to me to fit into the bucket of values, whether that's localism and local values and behaviors, whether that's someone's willingness and desire to be a steward of something versus being a owner or controller of something, and so it seems like values might be that third piece. And rather than this being some linear model and progression, it's the intersection of these three elements coming together. Awareness may be triggered through charisma and storytelling, like you were doing with Mama Red Knot, is starting to develop a persona around that. the education, which is like, why is this good to do and what can you do, flock walk, and then what kind of values are instilled in that sort of recognition and change of behavior to get that to be adopted by others. And it feels like it's somehow is some Venn diagram of sorts of behavior more than it is a linear model. Does that make any sense? Does that feel like, are values one of the missing components that you feel like you saw from this research project?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Values, and I know that this is something that y'all dig into at Blue Ion Outpost too, is really getting to know the client and knowing the target audience and figuring out what their values and their attitudes are in order to lean into those. And this is the whole framework of the community-based social marketing thing, is to amplify the benefits to behavior and get rid of some of those barriers. So whether it's a lack of external incentives or something else, getting rid of those things is equally as important as amplifying what people value in the target audience.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot more. You're absolutely right. Total Venn diagram, crazy model with all these lines going everywhere.
Yeah. Good stuff.
The question from Nick.
Oh, perfect timing. I just turned off my mic. So I guess we're getting into some deep-seated conservation questions that are withstanding still to this day. Nolan, when we were taking that science communications class, remember the knowledge deficit model?
Yep, it's exactly that same. Yep.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think about that when Melissa was just talking about that. But I've been kind of getting into this with my thesis too. And my question for you is, now that you're done, where do you think, and this goes along with the sea turtles too, because there are awareness campaigns for sea turtles, but there are also mandated lights off, where you run into compliance issues and giving out fines. I mean, have you read anything, or do you just have any opinions about the difference between these, holistic marketing campaigns and making decisions on, your own well-being or your own education, whatever that be, rather than actually enforcing and dishing out fines for, walking through flocks?
Yeah, so this is education versus enforcement.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah, so I think that they can work in tandem and that they probably should, especially when it comes to restricting people. Cases even in South Carolina where new laws go into place that are really good for birds, they fail or they're not enforced properly if there's not some kind of education done around them too. I mean, enforcement reaches people through influencing their feelings, usually kind of fear-based, applying external pressure. Those are all effective ways to change somebody's behavior, but I think they also need to be accompanied by other things like education. So really, I don't know that it's like enforcement versus education, but that could probably go hand in hand.
Yeah. I'm thinking Crab Bank is kind of a specific example. You can't go on there certain times of the year. And I think that works for the most part. But I had one more question about what was that marketing strategy that was most successful for you that you were mentioning? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. Oh, was it community-based social marketing?
Yeah, like relating, just making, like normalizing the activity.
Yeah, so and they actually talk about this as one of many strategies in those two books that I showed the covers of, but social diffusion or social norm theory. I can send you some references for it, but it's probably just as easy to find online.
Yeah, sweet. Thank you so much. Great job, man.
Thank you.
To pick up on that question on enforcement, Nolan, was there enforcement like fines specified on any of the signage at Naughty Beach?
I need to go back and look. I don't know that.
Wonder if any of those were subject to fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that wording was used on any of the signage at Naughty Beach. There, it was very small, like very tiny subtext on a sign.
Yeah, and regardless, it didn't seem to really have an impact. So yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? April?
Committee gets to grill him longer, but while we're in the public, I'll just throw out a crazy idea that I had. I wanted to know if anyone had, if you'd run across anyone doing this, because I'm still stuck on you can't change your behavior about something you don't know exists. Mm-hmm. Has anyone tried gamification as a strategy? Like, there are these birds out there that most people don't notice. Did you see any? And having some kind of reward system around that. Can we turn, which and then it becomes sort of like this positive thing, actually looking for the birds and changing your behavior might then follow if you start noticing them. But has anyone tried gamification as a strategy for this kind of conservation that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, though. I wonder if anybody on the call knows if gamification has been tried. You're making me think about, I mean, just birding in general is very similar to that game Pokemon Go that from 4 years ago or however long ago it was. But I mean, that got people out for a whole summer looking for imaginary wildlife. So why can't birding do the same thing? That's certainly, I don't know. I have not read anything about gamifying bird conservation.
I mean, this past Saturday was the Global Big Day. Was that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's not technically gamification, but you're right. It starts to enter into that territory. It's like I got out and participated and shared my observations. You know, they could probably add a gamification layer to that for certain audiences to make that even more appealing and interesting. That's a great idea.
If you're interested or anybody's interested, Rick Bonney has done a ton of research on birding and citizen science. I've been emailing with him back and forth, and he's used a citizen science identification app and a gamification feature on the app. And I don't know if it's a specific paper that he writes about that, but he definitely mentions it in a lot of his work. So Rick Bonney, he's kind of they call him the godfather of citizen science, but yeah.
Sorry, one last little thought on that is that the junior ranger program at the national parks has a bit of that as well, which I remember when my daughter was young, she got so fired up to get a packet, which allowed her when we were at Yellowstone to go see all these things and identify them and then come back to the and then get that judged and was awarded a junior ranger level. And so that to watch that behavior and that recognition and education happen in a kid in the course of 2 or 3 hours was pretty amazing. You know, that may get into that territory too.
April, did you have a question as well? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry. No, thank you. No, I actually think most of my questions got answered, so thank you very much. But I did just want to make a real quick comment. Thank you so much, Nolan, for everything, your presentation, your research. Having been a piping plover and a lease turn manager of nests in Massachusetts and Rhode Island more than 25 years ago, this is close to my heart, and I think I love the idea of all this using the social marketing information as a tool, because I know I sure did need it back then. I don't think the challenges are still a lot of the same thing. So I just want to say thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you saying that.
Great. Well, if we want to give Nolan one last final Zoom round of applause. And then we are going to ask that the committee please stay on, but our general public, please leave the Zoom meeting.
Thanks for coming.
Great job, Nolan.
Nice job, Nolan.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great job.
Fantastic.
Good job.
So I think
Thanks, everybody.
is this your entire committee, Nolan?
Yes.
Okay. Melissa, I am going to make you the host. Let me